Today's video is brought to you by longtime friend of the channel, Vite Ramen. Vite Ramen is a great and simple step to start being better. Instead of ordering fast food, you can instead make delicious but also healthy ramen easily from your own home. And on that note, compared to traditional ramen, Vite Ramen is low in sodium, has 31 grams of protein in each meal, and to be honest, is delicious. You can even check out their version 3.0 patch notes to see how they're constantly improving their flavors. Vite Ramen is also an American-made product, and the company pays its employees a living wage. What's more, they've been a long-time partner for the channel, and without them, I wouldn't have been able to put on the Twin Suns Squadrons tournament or the recent Spartan Masters Halo Infinite tournament, and maybe more of those to come. If you're interested in trying Vite Ramen, first of all, I encourage you to check out the comments under this video. People are always leaving their positive experiences, but also follow the link in the description and use code Eckharts. You'll get not only 10% off your order, but also $25 in free gifts. Thanks to Vite Ramen for sponsoring today's video. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another Book of Boba Fett breakdown. Today we are talking about the penultimate episode of Season 1, Chapter 6, From the Desert Comes a Stranger. Now, full spoiler warning for the episode, we're going to be digging into everything. Alright, let's talk about it. This is a tough episode for me to review because I simultaneously loved it and had some issues with it. First of all, the important thing, I really liked how this episode fit into the Star Wars universe as a whole. I like the way that it ties into The Mandalorian, specifically the end of The Mandalorian Season 2. I think it's cool that they're willing to use Luke again, that they're going to give us more Grogu. But my main issue is that this comes at the expense of the story they've been telling in the Book of Boba Fett, and now we have to sort of wrap up the entire season now in one episode. Now, if this final episode is over an hour long, I think that will be fine, but it's very unlikely that that's the case. I'm a little sad because this is almost the same thing that happened with The Mandalorian Season 1. The scope of the show has expanded to probably the detriment of some of these individual stories. I think my favorite episode of this show so far is probably Chapter 2. That one went really flashback heavy. It was long, and I think the benefit of that is we get a really intimate and deep look at one particular part of the universe. Although I do love the introduction of these major characters into the show, like The Mandalorian, and in this episode, Luke and Ahsoka, when we get to these sort of pillars of the lore in the universe, by necessity, we zoom out on the story, and that's meant for the last two episodes, for example, we see less Boba Fett. That alone is not necessarily a bad thing. Although the show is called the Book of Boba Fett, given how the show came about, I'm more than happy for it to sort of intertwine with the story of The Mandalorian. I think that's cool. Pretty much everyone that's watched this show probably watched The Mandalorian anyway, but with The Mandalorian's story being moved forward in a really significant way, it does almost by necessity mean that we are losing some, well, nuance, I guess. I do think that Disney is still trying to figure out how to properly structure some of these stories. Both Season 1 and Season 2 of The Mandalorian were met by some fans complaining that the show took too many detours or too many side stories. I personally never had that problem. I think each one of those stories offered opportunities to flesh out the character of the Mandalorian, the relationship between the Mandalorian and the child, and ultimately that's why we care so much about the new characters. Not because they were tied into Ahsoka or whomever else, but because they did get to stand on their own. They did get to have slow moments. So that's why I'm sort of in a weird spot with this show. These last two episodes have been great as episodes 1 and 2 of The Mandalorian Season 3. I would have loved them in that capacity, and I still do like them in the Book of Boba Fett. I do, however, feel sad that we missed the opportunity for smaller scale storytelling that we were getting in the opening bits of the Book of Boba Fett. That being said, that is something that I wanted, but other fans were clearly unhappy with the slow pace of the Book of Boba Fett, so I don't know. I'm certainly not saying that this was a bad choice. It's just, I hope we get the opportunity to learn more about the Book of Boba Fett. I definitely hope we get a Season 2. If I were to guess, I think maybe this season was structured this way because there had been a break since The Mandalorian Season 2, and they had to balance that break with telling the story of the Book of Boba Fett. Now, however, after this point, there's basically going to be Star Wars shows going non-stop, so it's my guess that there's going to be more flexibility in terms of scope. These are some ideas that I've been thinking about for the past couple of weeks. Let me know down in the comments if you guys would like a full video on this subject. I'd be more than happy to go into it with a bit more depth. With that being said, though, let's get into the actual episode itself. And I thought it was great, as I mentioned, for the Star Wars universe as a whole. I do still think that Dave Filoni has a lot in terms of live action directing to learn, and I do think that the direction was the weakest part of this episode. I think he's not quite as competent at using someone like CGI Luke, for example. I think he's also the weakest at setting up shots and environments. I found that in the last Ahsoka episode we got, and you can compare some of the, say, establishing shots or some of the use of the environment in this episode with what Bryce Dallas Howard did last episode, and I think that's pretty illustrative of the difference in skill. Another good example is just compare how the scenes in Garsa Fwip's cantina were filmed. They were much livelier, in my opinion, at least in past episodes, but this is me really dialing down on criticism. I still don't think Dave Filoni is bad. I just think these are areas where he will probably improve as he gets more experience. I think his general directing also makes the episodes feel a little bit disjointed, but nothing too serious, just some of my thoughts. When it came to CG Luke, I definitely think his appearance improved pretty significantly for this episode. I still don't know whether I prefer this method to calling in Sebastian Stan, but I do think, based on what we've seen, that even more improvements will come. I think the weakest aspects of Luke were probably his voice in this episode. Sometimes it sounded more like an imitation than a true Luke. Sometimes the lip syncing didn't really match up, but overall, I also thought that Luke was great. I really liked the interactions between him and Grogu. The musical cues I thought were maybe a little much, but just generally they were great, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of their dynamic in the future. A lot of people have talked about the moment where Luke asked Grogu to choose between the Beskar armor and his lightsaber. I personally think that that's a fake out. I'm going to be covering that later in this week when I can get a bit more free with spoilers and titles and thumbnails. But in my opinion, Luke has learned lessons from his redemption of Darth Vader and seeing what happened with the prequel era Jedi. I think that he has learned the difference between love and healthy love and unhealthy attachment. What he's doing here is determining whether Grogu is in the right mental state to even begin training, or whether his sort of loneliness and missing his adoptive father is just too much. However, I think if Grogu does decide to take the lightsaber, that Luke will also give him the Beskar, recognizing in a way that becoming a Jedi doesn't mean giving up everything that makes you, well, in his case, human, in Grogu's case, a living being. I do like that some seeds were planted here, though, for the future. I'm interested to see especially what happened with Grogu at Order 66. We now know that he was at the temple. I pray to God that they don't have Mace Windu come out from some back door and save him, but I guess we'll learn more about that in the future. It was also great to see Ahsoka back. I do think you run the risk of too many cameos. I don't think that was the case here, where her inclusion made sense. I do wish she would have maybe referenced the fact that she does still have this greater mission. To me, her tracking down of Thrawn is probably the single most interesting aspect right now of this era of Star Wars, so hopefully we learn more about that either in her show or hopefully even sooner in The Mandalorian Season 3. Moving on though, I was really happy to see Cobb Vanth be back, and I do think about how if this show had not included The Mandalorian, how it would have been nice to tie Cobb into Boba without The Mandalorian acting as a sort of connecting character. That would have sort of showed me some confidence in the filmmaking and how these, what were secondary characters, except for Boba, I guess, are standing on their own. And I think that would have been especially great too with the introduction at the end of Cad Bane. I really loved Cad Bane, by the way. I thought they were going to have a tough time converting him to live action. I mean, it was, I think, pretty obvious that he would get the live action treatment, and initially I was thrown off. I was like, why is his skin so pale? Why does he look somewhat different? Then it hit me, this isn't the Cad Bane of the Clone Wars. Cad would be in his early 70s now, so I thought the portrayal with that in mind was actually really great. And I do think there was a bit of a subtle hint towards the unfinished Clone Wars reels, and in those, Boba Fett was the one who killed Cad Bane, but in their duel, he also gets shot in the head, but survives because of his helmet. I was legitimately a little bit worried for my boy Cobb Vanth, but he's almost certainly survived. I don't think the deputy has, however, although maybe he will, and he'll be a source of inspiration foundation for the town. Still, that's a introduction that I think definitely makes sense, and it's kind of just crazy how this show has served, for better or for worse, as an entry point for so many cool characters. I think this episode had lots of nice little touches too. I liked how the crate dragon was on top of the Jawa sandcrawler, and the skeleton was also in the town's cantina. Yeah, those are my overall thoughts on this episode. Again, I'm in a weird place. I think as an episode of the Book of Boba Fett, I liked it less than last episode. That one felt a lot more carefully crowded, where I think this one relied a bit too much on cameos, but it was still a great hour or so of Star Wars television, so I'm not going to complain too much. I'm really looking forward to seeing the finale. I hope that we get a hint of a season 2. I definitely want more of this show. I love Tamura. He needs some time to shine. But that's all I have for today, guys. Make sure you let me know down in the comments what topics you'd like me to cover this week until the next episode of the Book of Boba Fett comes out. I want to put out 4 or 5 videos kind of breaking down elements of this episode. But guys, until then, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.